This is Shalom World Podcast.
My name is Cameron Côté, and I am the co-host of the Pro-Life Guys podcast. And I am really excited to join Shalom World TV from Calgary, Alberta, Canada, for their Lenten mission, the Victory of the Cross. Today, I want to share about how through the victory of the cross, we can find rest. Rest is something that we long for in our lives. Not just like physical rest of after a long day of work, I just want to lie down on the couch and snooze. It's not just after a long run or a day at the gym, I need to rest and recover my strength. But the battle of daily life, the vocations that we lead, whether it's in ministry, whether it's employment or unemployment, whether it's family or the single life. Life is difficult, and yet there is rest in Jesus because Jesus has conquered the world and he is victorious through the cross. And I think often of the story of John's disciples when they come to Jesus and they say, "Are you the Messiah, or do we have to wait for another?" And just how much that resonates with me of how difficult it must be to go on and on and on, just seeking salvation, seeking victory, and not being able to find it until one day you do. The idea of going through the desert and having these mirages of oases, and you're seeing this and you think that it's the right thing, but it's not actually there. And you just have to keep walking and walking and walking. And yet the victory of the cross has planted an oasis in our life that we can come to day after day, not only at the end of the day at our nighttime prayer, but at every moment in the day to be able to take rest in Jesus. And this has been so important in my own life. I work full-time in Canada's pro-life movement. I've had over 10,000 conversations with random strangers about the issue of abortion. I've literally talked to thousands of mothers and fathers who have tragically chosen abortion for their children before I was able to reach them. And it's heartbreaking. And I remember speaking to an older woman at literally the busiest intersection in Canada, I think, at Yonge and Dundas in downtown Toronto. And I was talking to people about abortion, and I asked her, "What do you think about abortion?" She looked at the sign that I was holding, and she started to cry. And she said, "Where were you 25 years ago?" At the time, I wasn't even 25 at the time, and so I wasn't even born yet. And she said, 25 years ago, I became pregnant, and I could not convince my parents, my boyfriend, my doctor, that was a living baby. They all told me that it was a clump of cells, that it was just a fetus, that I didn't have to worry about it, and that abortion would put my life back on track. What do I do now? I had no idea what to say to her. I had no idea how I could help her pick up the pieces. She shared with me that over the last 25 years, she had been in and out of rehab, relying on drugs and alcohol to try to help her cope with the pain of knowing that she had chosen abortion for her child. By God's grace, I was able to share with her about the hope and healing that is available to anyone who has sinned. Me and you and anyone, regardless of the sins that we have committed in our life, there is hope, there is healing, the sacrament of reconciliation, the sacrament of penance, and how there is rest for her. She had been running, trying to find constantly how she could find meaning and value in her life after she had done something as terrible as abortion. To be able to convey to her and with her that there is rest, that you can find healing in Jesus, and that you don't need to continue in the rat race. You don't need to work harder and harder and harder every day with no hope of any kind of fulfillment or recovery. And it wasn't only important for her, it was important for me as well. That was an incredibly draining conversation. We spent over 2 hours talking to people constantly in this busy, busy intersection. And at times, I thought to myself, how am I going to go on? How can I keep talking to such a broken world? A world that has been plagued by famine and abortion and so many injustices. How can I continue to serve people? How can I have the strength to serve? And in just a single moment of being able to reflect on Christ, it is when I am weak It is when I am faced with trials and tribulation and persecution and all kinds of challenges, when I know that I am at my weakest, it is then that I am strong as I unite myself to Christ in his victorious cross. I can unite myself to him because I know that he has already won the battle of earthly life, that he has conquered sin and death, and that at the end of the day, I can come back to him in prayer and say, Jesus, here's my day. Fill me up so that I can do this again tomorrow. I can talk to more people. I can engage with more of our broken culture, to know that I can come to that well and there will always be water, living water in Jesus, whether that's through the gift of the sacraments, whether that's in adoration and being able to adore the blessed sacrament in adoration, whether that's in a nightly prayer of hands held, joined amongst the family praying the rosary, or whether that's just a silent, reflective prayer that you offer in the middle of a midday task. There is rest in Jesus because he is that victorious oasis. We have the opportunity, we have the invitation. By God's grace, we will enjoy complete final victory for all of eternity with him in heaven. But we don't have to wait for heaven for that rest. We hear in the gospel that we are called to pick up our cross and follow Jesus as disciples of him. And that would be impossible if the cross led to death. If the cross led to suffering and suffering alone, then who would ever want to pick up their cross, let alone be willing to, let alone be able to? And yet we hear later in the gospel that his burden is light, his yoke is easy. Come to me, all you who hunger and thirst, and I will give you rest. Rest for the journey, because we're not in a position, unfortunately, yet to rest permanently with Jesus, right? That in today's day and age, we don't have the opportunity necessarily to put all of our troubles aside and never deal with them again. That isn't what Jesus is inviting us to. It's not a matter of disregard your responsibilities, disregard your family, disregard your employment, disregard your vocation, but rather allow Jesus to be the one that gives you the strength that you need to do that. And I think about that not only in the ministry that I do, talking to people about abortion, something that some of you might think is kind of crazy, but even in my daily life, right? My beautiful 2-year-old daughter, Eleanor, she is just getting over a cold, actually. A couple weeks ago, she had a cold. And she was a very colicky baby when she was newborn, and we spent lots of nights up with her and just wondering, like, how am I going to be able to go to work tomorrow? I haven't slept at all. I haven't eaten properly. I haven't done anything. My daughter's been crying day in and day out. Finally, we had a little bit of relief to that, and then it just came back. Eleanor was sick. She had a stuffy nose. She was crying in the night. She couldn't get comfortable or couldn't sleep. And to just know that in that, she wasn't needing my strength. She was needing God's strength. And I could come to God while I was 3 o'clock in the morning trying to cuddle my 2-year-old daughter who's just weeping inconsolably, to be able to rest in Jesus and say, you know what, Lord, give me the strength that I need to be able to not only love my daughter right now, to give her the protection, the comfort, the security that she needs to be safe and get healthy, but give me the strength that I need to go to work in the morning and not be miserable and short-tempered and impatient with all of my coworkers. Give me the strength that I need to be able to do this and to be able to come home from a hard day of work and know that I can rest in a victorious Lord, right? I have a hard time. Many of my friends while I was in university were not Catholic, did not have a faith. And I had such a hard time understanding how they could go on day after day. How do you do it? How do you navigate the challenges that are constantly thrown at you in this broken world, the broken relationships, the broken culture, the ideas that are constantly thrown at us through the media, through the news, war in our world, and poverty and corruption, and so many injustices and discriminations? How do we deal with that day after day? The only way that we can deal with that is by allowing that strength to be provided by God. Because as we hear about in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, if I do all of these things, but I do them without love, We know that God is love. If I do them without love, if I do them without God, then it doesn't matter if I speak with the eloquence of men and angels. It doesn't matter if I give of myself to the utmost. It doesn't matter if I lay down my life. If I do it without God, then what am I giving? Nobody wants my love. Nobody wants what I have to offer, but we all hunger and thirst for Christ. And so in that day-to-day challenge, in that day-to-day giving, allow yourself to not only be filled with God's strength, but to come back and find that rest. As I've talked about, I work in the pro-life movement. I've found myself so close to burnout so many times, just being so emotionally, physically, psychologically overwhelmed by what I have to deal with. Talking to people who have been victims of sexual assault, talking to people who have had a dozen abortions, talking to 16-year-old girls at public high schools who have already had 2 abortions because they didn't know any other way to cope with what they were going through. That takes a toll on me, and your life takes a toll on you. I think about the beautiful priests that I've had in my life, and I think about a priest who hears confession all afternoon. How do they do that? How can you hear the sins of a broken world and be a conduit of God's mercy, be the hands and feet and lips of Christ? The only way that you can do that is through the victory of the cross. The only way that we can find rest on our journey is through the victory of the cross. That it's allowed us to find comfort, to find rest. Think about John's disciples. If Jesus wasn't the Messiah and they simply had to go on and keep trying to find the Messiah, just trying to find somebody that had the answer, somebody who was the truth, goodness, and life that they hungered for, that would be so difficult. And the days that I forget that, the days that I think that I can do this on my own are the worst days that I live, because I run out of energy in the first 5 minutes. The idea of being able to give what somebody needs, a human connection, a human encounter, is impossible on your own. And as you give of yourself and as you give of what the Lord has given you, that takes a toll on you, and you need to take rest. This is not some degree of insufficiency. It's not that the strong, holy people don't need rest. We think about people like Mother Teresa and the beautiful ministry that she did in Calcutta and in so many other places around the world. How much time did Mother Teresa spend in prayer, filling up from Jesus? How much time did Pope John Paul II, do the beautiful priests and pastors in our life spend filling up and resting in the loving arms of Jesus? I will never forget the encounter that I had during Eucharistic adoration while I was in university. I was a crazy person in university. I was taking a full course load. I have a degree in genetics from the University of Victoria, focus in human development. And during that time, taking a full course load, I was working 20 hours a week at a Mexican restaurant. I was playing high-level soccer at a varsity level, 3-hour practices 2 or 3 times a week, plus a half day of games on Saturday. Playing high-level sports, I was involved in my church youth ministry, preparing talks and whatnot, and crazy dramas and skits that I was doing to help them understand the beauty of the Catholic faith. I was doing all of these things, and yet I was rarely taking the opportunity to rest in the Lord. And so I went on this retreat put on by the Catholic Students Association at the University of Victoria. And it was then that I came back to the roots of resting in Jesus during Eucharistic adoration, that I felt like I had to be on the go constantly, but to spend an hour, and it only started with an hour, it turned into 3 or 4 hours just sitting there at the foot of the cross, looking up at my Lord there, fully present, body, blood, soul, and divinity in the Eucharist, and just resting, not actively praying, not trying to pump out as many rosaries as I possibly could, not trying to bust through the entire Bible while I was sitting there. Prayer doesn't have to be work. Matthew Kelly, a phenomenal Catholic speaker and writer, talks about how transformative in his life was his decision to spend 10 minutes in silence every day. Silence in a church, not petitionary prayer, not asking for blessings, not thanking God for the blessings that he has bestowed, just silent time in the presence of God, allowing God to fill him up. And that's what I took into that time of adoration. And that's what I've taken ever since then into adoration. And whether I have access to Eucharistic adoration at my home parish, whether I'm going to another parish somewhere in Calgary, or whether I don't have the opportunity to participate in adoration, I'm simply reflecting on a Bible passage, or simply reflecting on my day prayerfully with the Lord, before work, after work, during work. To have the courage, to have the patience and peace and humility to accept that I can't do this on my own and that I need 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever it may be, to rest, to center myself in the cross, in the victorious cross of God, to know, as I've spoken about last week, about the victory of the cross and how it is God that works in the hearts and minds of all those that we're engaging with. God is the one who gives us strength. God is the one who moves mountains. To be able to take that rest, to allow God to use me as a tool. God, don't let me get ahead of myself. God, don't let me put myself before you and think that because of the training, because of the experience that I have, that I'm able to do this without you. When I do pro-life ministry, when I try to parent, when I try to be a good husband without God, I fail miserably. I'm sure that you do that as well. I'm sure that in any part of your life, if you try to do it without Jesus, you will fail miserably. And this is one of the beautiful components. I know that I've shared a lot of different components that I've been able to experience over the last couple of years. I remember doing a CCO faith study. Catholic Christian Outreach is an engagement organization here in Canada. And I was invited to participate in their first level of faith formation studies. And to be honest, I had a bit of a difficult time being willing to commit to that for a couple of reasons. Unfortunately, I had elevated myself too highly. You see, in my workplace, I work in this pro-life organization, and it's basically 50-50 Catholic and Dutch Reformed Calvinist Protestants. And so we are debating Christianity constantly. We're talking about the sacraments. We're debating the nature of the Trinity. We're debating all these kinds of very high level, really, really deep and rich and meaningful components. But in doing that, I had lost sight on the very basic principle that I need Christ to be the center of my life. And Catholic Christian Outreach does a phenomenal job making that point simply, effectively, and diligently. That if the cross floats out of the center of your life, if it becomes peripheral or even entirely absent, you are going to have an incredibly difficult time, if not an impossible time, doing what God has put before you. By centering yourself on the cross, by resting in the victorious arms of Christ that he achieved on the cross, that he achieved through this Lenten mission that we are a part of right now, leading into the Easter season. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's not only celebrate the victory of the cross, let's celebrate the entirety of the cross. The life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, that the victory was only relevant because the battle that he endured and he conquered sin and death. And allow that victory of the cross to give you rest through this Holy Week and through the rest of your Catholic life here on earth. And Lord willing, you will rest in that entirely in the heavenly kingdom.
Thank you for joining us today. We'd like to hear what you thought of today's session. Share your feedback with us at podcast@shalomworld.org. You can motivate and support us today. shalomworld.org/donate. Visit shalomworld.org for more information about Shalom World podcasts. To get the latest updates, make sure you follow us on Instagram at Shalom World Podcasts. Shalom World Podcasts is now available on all online platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and others.